Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Lessons from Terrible Students. We are the Terrible Students. My name is Jeremy. That's the doctor over there. Say hello, doctor.
Hello, doctor. And hello, Jeremy.
Hey, that's me. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. What we are going to be talking about today is something that I am particularly passionate about. So this is quality control, or QC, and how we can use that to produce better learning objects. So before we jump into that, just a reminder that this is a Lumius sponsored podcast. At Lumius, we are your partner in learning. So welcome back, everybody. Like I said in our intro, we're going to be talking about quality control. We'll be calling it QC from here on, because that's what we call it internally. So quality control, just to give you a quick definition, quality control is where we have different eyes than the people that have created the learning object. That's very important. We'll get into that in a second. But different eyes looking at your deliverables. So they're going to review your job aids. They're going to review your reference guides, your e-learnings, your anything. This is not a SME review. This is not a stakeholder review. This is not anything like that. This is going to happen prior to all of that. So this is somebody that you have sent this review for a very specific purpose, and you have defined that purpose to them as you send it to them. So you can send it to them and say, hey, check my spelling and grammar in here. Hey, check, make sure my flow's good. Check, make sure, give me a functionality review. Make sure everything's good in that. Maybe check all of the above. If you have a dedicated QC team, like we are very lucky to have here at Lumius, we send it to them and they have a QC checklist that they run through, which is fantastic. But this is very important, in my opinion, and primarily I've done e-learning for a good chunk of my career. Very important for e-learning. When you are an e-learning developer, you know that you spend hours and hours at a time going through these things at different places to make sure buttons are working, making sure your interactions are working. It's sending you all over the project. And sometimes small things slip through the cracks. Maybe, there's a period at the end of a bullet where it shouldn't be, or there's not a period at the end of a sentence. Maybe there's, you use the wrong, there in somewhere in a sentence just because you were, typing 150 words a minute and, your brain ran away from you. All of these things can happen, and all of these things look bad if it gets through to your client, if it gets through to your stakeholder in your SME. So that's where, in my opinion, that QC is very important, because QC makes sure you don't look stupid. That's the way that I look at it. And that's why I think these reviews are so important, is because you've spent the time building rapport with the client, and it does not take much to damage that. And it could be that you have a client that is very grammar focused and they are very spelling focused, and they will latch onto that one thing and they will think, well, if he used the wrong there, what else am I missing? What else is in here? I know. That was good, right?
That was amazing.
You appreciate that. So, if they did this one thing wrong here, what else is in here that I'm not seeing? And that will make me concerned. So that was my little soapbox to begin with on what QC actually is. The key of it is to have somebody that maybe they're associated with the project, but they haven't seen the deliverable. Maybe they're not even associated with the project. They're not looking for content. What they are looking for is, does it work? Does it make sense? And is there any of these small, like spelling and grammar things that need to be fixed before they send out? So I think the key is just to let them know what they're reviewing to begin with. Go ahead, Tar.
Right. And, for me, QC, same thing. I don't want to look stupid. And if I'm running 4 or 5 projects, I am building 10 deliverables at the same time, I know what it's supposed to say and what it's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. However, I can miss something. I'm a human being. We all are.
Exactly.
You can miss things. So for me, having that second set of eyes is a lifesaver for, like you said, credibility. I've had a client before who's opened something that first page, there was a mistake on it.
Mhm.
Glaring mistake. Would have been caught if anybody had opened it before, right? But it got to the client and it immediately dinged credibility with them because it's like, well, if you missed something so obvious right here on page one, what else is wrong? And that just it takes a long time to come back from that. It takes a long time. And um
Absolutely.
it, it just does. And I'm going to jump to our second point that evaluation is part of the ADDIE process. It's part of all
Mhm.
development processes and should be. And when you think about QC, I mean, you see ADDIE and it's ADDIE. However, a lot of diagrams show the E in the middle. And that's kind of how we approach it. We are evaluating this learning at every step of the process. Every one of those evaluations has a different purpose. We're not doing evaluation when at the beginning of the project of project efficiency. That's not the level of evaluation we're talking about. We're talking about the QC of the prototype. And does it function the way it's supposed to? Do the buttons work? Are I'm not going to be able to think of the word. You know what I'm talking about.
I believe
Inarticulate
what you're
when you
going for
change
is thingamajig is the
the
thingamajig
thingamajig
document.
changes color
Yeah.
when you click it or not. It's changing states. That's what it is. I knew I'd get there. That kind of stuff. You need someone checking that stuff behind you. And so we look at those we have checklists depending on what it is and where it is in the process of what our QCers are supposed to be looking for. We also have multiple people. I've kind of jumped to our next thing. I'm sorry, Jeremy, but our structured process of
No, you're
doing
doing fine.
this
I'm gonna
is
sit here and drift off.
different people look at the project in different ways. I look at every deliverable that goes out of here at different stages, and I'm not looking necessarily for the grammar mistakes or, typos,
Right.
that sort of
Right.
thing. Now, do I find them? Of course I do. And do I mark them? Of course I do. But I'm looking at them based on some standards, some learning excellence standards that we have in place. And I have a whole different checklist of things that I'm looking for than a QCer is looking for, that the project manager is looking for. We all have
Right.
different things that we are looking at whenever we review things at different stages.
Yeah, and I'm gonna back you up just a little bit, but
That's
you're right.
fine.
I think the key is to ensure that is a set forth in the beginning as a structured part of the process. Don't
Mm-hmm.
just assume you're going to have time to do that. Actually dedicate time and resources to doing that QC. So even if it's, if you're an outside company or an outside contractor, put that in your time for your deliverable. So if you know it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take you 2 days to complete this e-learning, add an extra day. Say it's going to take me 3 days and use that extra day for QC. Make sure it is built and baked into your process because that is
Mm-hmm.
very important. We don't want to make it seem like we're doing this QC and that it's taking extra time. What you want to do is present that as this is just part of the process that we're going to do. And this is
Mm-hmm.
a part of the process that is important. And this is why it's important. XYZ. This is going to check, we're going to have our project manager check A/B timing. We're going to have this person check for grammar. We're going to have this person check for flow. Because all those things are important because learning objectives can balloon pretty quickly, especially if you're
Oh
doing, say,
yeah.
a curriculum, say like a 9-week curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
That can just be a ton of deliverables, a ton of content. And if you're not actively QCing and checking along the way, something's going to get through. I will guarantee you something will get through if
Yeah.
you wait until the end and say, hey, Jimmy, I want you to review all 9 weeks of content for me. Make sure all the grammar's good. I appreciate it. Thanks, guy. And
And
Jimmy's
I
going to
need
sit
it
there and not
tomorrow
do
at noon. Yeah.
it. Right. Exactly. So we don't want to wait until the end. We want to make sure to
Mm-hmm.
give QC the time and respect that it deserves. And I think this is not something that a lot of companies do. I don't think, at least the companies that I've worked for in the past, I don't think there has been a true dedicated QC process. There may be hey, let's just send it out to the team and see what they think, which is great. There is a time and place for that, but that is not a QC review. A QC review is targeted to certain things, and it is there to make sure that you are ready to move and send to the client. Even if you're an internal, it's ready to go to, you may be sending some of this stuff to senior managers, senior directors, and, Lord help you, C-suite folks. You want to make sure that everything is buttoned up before
Yeah.
it goes to those type of reviewers, even if you're in a prototype stage. If you have placeholders, you want to make sure your placeholders are labeled.
Yep.
That's a big thing, so that they know, hey, this is a temporary image. Hey, this is a temporary. Maybe they've never seen that nice Latin paragraph that every authoring software throws into a blank text box nowadays, and they could get to that and go, why? I didn't take high school Latin. What is this? Why is this in here? QC is going to help you recognize all of that and notate that. So that I think that's why I'm so passionate about QCing work, not only having my work QC, but being available and helping other people QC theirs. I think the more eyes that are on it, well, let me amend that statement. I feel Tara like staring daggers at me. The more targeted reviewers you have that understand their role in the review process, the better.
Yeah.
Not the more reviewers you have, the better. That can
Right.
quickly get out of hand. But I think the more targeted reviews that you can get before you send something out for client review, the better. And it's
Well,
just going. Go ahead, Tar.
I was just going to say that also the way to handle that, if you're an internal shop and you don't have staff that is dedicated to QC, I mean, you're going to have somebody at work that is your go-to person. I know in places that I've been, it's like, hey, I'll ping one of my coworkers and be like, hey, do you have time to look through this for me? And I'll say, I really need you to check this, this, and this for me. And ask, just to make sure that it makes sense. So, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
you don't have to have a dedicated staff, but it's a second pair of eyes, at least a second pair of eyes to take a look at it, just to get it away from you.
Exactly. I think that's key. I think there is a misconception that as you're developing e-learning, that you'll be able to catch all of those little things. I don't care how detailed and meticulous you think you are in authoring documents. You're going to miss something. Nobody's perfect.
Nope.
Nobody. And I think that's been a prevailing kind of misconception that I've noticed in the learning world, is that you have to be perfect. Everything that you develop has to be absolutely perfect before anybody ever sets eyes on it.
Yeah.
It's a lot like, I consider it a lot like art. Like, it will never be perfect. It's never going to be 100% on the money all the way through first shot. Hopefully you're going to get it to 99.99999% by the end of it. But there's always going to be a piece of content that somebody wanted in there that's not in there. There's always going to be an activity that one person wanted to do one way, the other person wanted to do the other way. It's never going to be 100% perfect. Now, obviously, we still want to try to get it as close to that as possible. Right. But you can't let that stall your progress. And I think so many people are afraid of feedback that it boggles my mind. And I think that's where I'm going to insert. We have something in here. Our next point is going to be, about training your team for QC. But I'm going to go rogue a little bit here. And I want to talk about feedback a little bit, because I think it feeds directly into this conversation. Tar, are you okay with that? You are my co-host.
I'm fine with that, because I'm going to take you down another rabbit hole in a minute that just came to me. Awesome. So please.
We'll go one for one.
Okay.
So while it's top of mind, I'm going to go ahead and talk about feedback. So,
absolutely.
As an instructional designer, I came on as an instructional designer with a very, very talented team in 2014. I was exceedingly lucky. And one of the things that I found out very quickly is that you will get feedback. Oh, buddy, will you get feedback? You're going to get more feedback than you ever thought that you would get. You may get it all from one person. It may be a group. Who knows? But no matter how close that you think you've got this prototype or this beta or whatever it is to perfect, you will never have a course that does not have some type of feedback. And here's the hot take.
That's right.
If you do have a course that does not have any feedback, that's because they didn't look at it.
Nobody
That's
looked
the
at
only
it.
way. That's the only way
100%.
you're going to come back from a review without any kind of comment
Yeah.
is that they didn't even open it and looked at it. They rubber stamped it. So I think as
You
an
are
instructional designer, one of
100%.
the things, I think the important thing is be okay with that feedback. Know that not all feedback is actionable, and that's okay. So a lot of feedback is that person's opinion. Weigh that opinion against what you know of your project, against what role that person has in the project, and what you know as an instructional designer would be the best way to present this type of learning and this type of information. So consider all of that when reading the feedback. Don't completely discount anything. Go in with an open mind reading all this feedback. Just make sure and ensure that you are getting some type of feedback and be okay with that.
I
Sorry, you look
think
like you're going to
too.
say something.
Yeah. I was just going to say, if you are working in this business and you can't handle feedback, this is not the right job for you. Period.
You're gonna get
It's
it,
never
buddy.
going to
Ooh,
be.
buddy.
I started my career years ago in journalism. Same thing. Okay. You're going to
Yeah.
get feedback. You're going to get letters to the editor. You're going to get angry phone calls. It's just part of the job. So for this, you have to do that too. It's not personal. It is not
Exactly.
personal.
Exactly.
And I know this is your baby. You created it. We're asking you to be invested in your project, to care about it. So that makes it sting a little when you get some feedback. And believe me, I will sit here and scream at the sky about feedback I get on something, but I'm not going to act like that in front of people. And
Right.
and then I have to bring myself back and like, will you stop it? This is not personal. Who cares? It's one of those things. Just do the job and move on. And, there are different personality types that are better about handling that. But Jeremy, you are 100% correct. You are going to get feedback from somewhere.
Yeah. My first project was a little 2-page job aid. And I sent it to, it's the first one I had written since, they had me do a sample one when I was interviewed to become an instructional designer. This is the first one I had actually written for my first project. I sent it to my manager at the time because that was our process, and he went through it. And he had a couple of things, and he goes, "Okay, now I want you to send it to this guy." I said, "Okay, he's not on the project." He goes, "No, send it to him." Okay, sure. So I just shot him an email, said, "Hey, can you review this for me?" You talk about a paper bleeding when it came back. He tore that thing from one end to the other, and he was right on 95% of it. And I talked to my manager and I said, "Hey, look, man, this guy like ripped this thing to pieces." He goes, "Oh yeah, that's why we send it to him. Like he knows that's what we expect from him." And
Absolutely.
he knows that, especially coming from me as a new instructional designer, he knew I needed help on some things like this. Mm-hmm. And, we did have a conversation, and I had to kind of get around that because I then thought at that point, okay, well, the document I just made clearly sucked. Because
I'm not cut out for this work.
Right. Imposter syndrome kicks in, right? That's
exactly.
But, he goes, my boss was good enough at the time to go, no, look, like it's okay. That's like, I send him stuff and it comes back like this. Like we send him these things for a reason. He will catch this stuff. He just knows it, and he knows what makes good learning for our audience. We were assigned to a specific audience at the time. Mm-hmm. So, it's key just to get somebody else to look at it and then not be offended. Because you're absolutely right. It's not personal. They're not saying that, "Oh my God, you're so stupid. Why did you do it this way?" They're saying, "Okay, maybe this is not how I would have done it. Let me show you a different way."
Right.
Adjust if you want or don't. If you don't want to take that feedback, not all feedback is actionable.
That's
it's
right.
just not. So
well, and I mean, it's even like feedback you get from QC. QC does not necessarily have the context of the project in front of them.
That's a good
So,
point.
as
Yeah,
an
absolutely.
example, a project that I was working used phone calls as examples of how to interact with customers. And so they had quoted phone calls. People don't
Right.
speak the way they write. So when it went to QC, they were like, oh my, it was like, oh my gosh, what do I do?
Yeah.
And it was like,
All
okay,
comes back
calm
highlighted.
down. First off, I'm not changing any of these to be proper sentences because the point is this is a conversation between two
Right.
people. And sometimes they don't have all the context, just like a SME doesn't necessarily have all the context about how the learning part works. They may know about the content, but you're the SME about the best way to show that to somebody. And sometimes you just
Exactly.
have to explain it to them that, yes, you may have done it this way in the classroom, but to make it more effective in an e-learning, we have to do it like this. They're getting the same information. We're just having to deliver it in a little different way in order to make it more consumable.
Exactly. So that's my kind of high horse on feedback. So that we'll come off my sidetrack, and then immediately go into Tara. So Tara, I'm interested. What was your thing that your
I'm
light bulb that went off in your head?
I'm thinking about Chat GPT and all these people rushing out there because they love the Chat GPT. We're all going to get
Keeping
rich
it,
quick, right?
yeah, keeping it current and topical. I like it. I like it.
So I'm just thinking about how much more important a QC process would be if you are going to try to auto-generate information for people. You better have somebody who knows the content as well as the mechanics, because
Yeah.
a Chat GPT could make you look real stupid real quick.
Well, it's there's it's so funny. I've read a ton of. My background is in computer information systems, software, and how all
Yep.
that technology goes. So I try to stay pretty current on that type of thing. So
Yeah.
I have a nowhere near deep understanding of how AI works and kind of how the technology works. Just as a real quick, you need some type of source that your AI can pull from,
Yes.
being that an internet, or, something off the internet or some type of database, something like
Oh,
that.
wow.
You have to have something that your AI is
Yes.
feeding from.
In
It is
order
only as
for,
good.
exactly. In order for your
Yeah, it's
AI to
only as
be
good as your
able
source.
to, for you to be able to make a decision based on a suggestion from AI, you've got to be able to have the information, the data source that it got it from. And
Right.
the scariest thing you just said was information from the internet. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Can you imagine? It's like
Yeah, there
anything
are some of them
else.
that will just pull everything.
Absolutely.
And
It's like,
we as people know Wikipedia may not be a reliable source. They're
yes.
not everything on the internet is true, folks. I don't know if
What?
you guys realize this or not, but not
No.
everything on the internet is
Stop.
factually accurate.
Stop
So
it. Stop it
I
right
know,
now,
crazy, right?
Jeremy. But
So,
that's what
but
so it's like that whole crap in, crap out thing. Like if you
yes,
put in
exactly.
bad data, it's like doing statistics or research. If you put in bad data, you're going to get bad data out of it. So it's like, I was just thinking about that as we were talking about QCing and all the I's and things. And I was just like, the whole influx of the Chat GPT thing and AI and that kind of stuff. I mean, I love gadgets, and while the Terminator is probably going to happen, and I'm prepared for it, my Alexa is going to get me convicted of a crime. I have no doubt, but I love gadgets, so I'm all for all of this Chat GPT and playing with it and learning the technology. I love using the AI stuff to build things, but I don't think you can lose this piece, because unless you have educated your AI specifically to accurate QC information, you are not going to be able to let it check stuff for you either. It's like spell check. How many things get through spell check?
Exactly.
So,
No, that's actually a pretty good corollary. Yeah, I have not, complete disclaimer here. I have not used AI tools. I've read about them.
mhm,
I have a very 50,000 foot understanding of how they operate and what they can do. I've read some of the and seen some of the images that were the result of using AI
mhm.
before. And I do think you're absolutely right. It will get you some of the way there, but it's not going to do it for you. You can't. It's using the proper tool for the proper thing.
Exactly.
If you wanted to use it to get you, like, maybe you're just in a writer's block, you can't figure out how to phrase certain things. Yeah, maybe pop it in there, see what it says, but then obviously you're going to look at it from a state of, does this make sense within the context of my course, within the context of my curriculum, for my audience? That, I don't think that's ever going to go away. There's always going to need to be somebody
Mhm.
there to say, does this make sense or not? I don't think that an AI can take
Is there
over.
though? Is there though, Jeremy?
Oh, I hope
So
so.
I do want to back up for 1 second to talk about
Sure.
Wikipedia because we did disparage them. And I do want
Yeah,
to add a
I did touch on
caveat.
Wikipedia. Yeah.
I do want to caveat that with Wikipedia is a great place to start. If you are
Yes.
doing research or you're looking for something, don't read what's on there. Go down and find the things that the sources that they use to write that information and click those links and go to those. When I was
Yeah.
teaching university classes, that's what I would tell people is, hey, you better not list Wikipedia as your source, but you could start there. And here's how you can use it as a tool to go find the information you need. So, Wikipedia, who is not a
Yeah. I
sponsor
mean,
of this podcast, is perfectly useful
right.
for some things.
Yeah, no, you're right. And you're absolutely right. I think it's a good place to start. I think
Mhm.
from the beginning, I think Wikipedia came out when I was, middle school, high school. I'd have to go back and
Oh,
actually
shut
figure
up.
out where the,
You do that every episode. You get
where
some
the actual,
age
I do.
remark in there. God,
What
just
are you going
stab in
to
the
do?
heart every time.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because it was every time we got some type of assignment for a
Of
research
course.
paper or something like that, it was like written on the whiteboard. It was
Yeah.
in the emails that we get it, like in all caps. Wikipedia is not a scholarly resource. You cannot use
Yes.
Wikipedia as a reference. So that's not saying that there's not great information on Wikipedia. It's saying, yes, start there, but do your additional research. Make sure that you
Yeah.
go one step deeper and that you verify what you're seeing, because Wikipedia by design can be edited by anybody. So you want to
Anybody.
make sure that whatever is on that page is independently referenced somewhere else in some type of scholarly article that's been
Mhm.
vetted. And I think that's the
Yes.
key is digging a little deeper and making sure that
Yeah.
you're finding good things. So yes,
So I think
Wikipedia
the
is great.
same,
I don't mean to
yes.
dismiss it, but
No, and I think the same thing is going to happen as we watch AI develop and we watch Chat GPT and all those things happen. I mean, it's about the data set. What is it getting its information from? How is it educating itself? That, I mean, that's the part that I don't think some people make the connection. They just think AI, and it's like, but you realize that it is like it's machine learning. It is
right.
learning from all the information that you put into it. It's like that the Fifth Element. Whenever Bruce Willis sits her down in front of the TV and she watches TV all day, and she's just that's what it
Yes.
is.
Such a
So
good reference. It's a great
I love
reference.
that movie.
Such a good movie. If anybody hasn't seen that movie, it's fantastic. Chris
You
Rock,
got to
clearly,
see that movie.
or Chris Tucker, not Chris Rock. It's so good.
Yes.
So good. Anyway, okay. So those are our tangents. So
That's
we'll
it.
come back on to our main point. What we want to talk about next is, if you're not lucky like us here at Lumius, we have a dedicated QC team. They know what their expectations are. They know what the role is, and they are fantastic in what they do. But if you are not lucky enough to have that, how you can talk your team through specific things that they can, processes that you can put in place in your business to kind of create this QC thing. It's not, honestly, for me, I don't believe it's all that hard. It is a time investment. It is a time investment. And I think that's where a lot of companies will balk at the additional, because it's additional work that has to be done. But
But it
this is
saves so
something
much
that
time in the long run.
it does save
It's
time in the
like,
end.
oh my
It
gosh.
it is a kind of a long, a big picture type thing that you need to think about. But it is something specifically that, yeah, you do need to train your team on this. They do need to understand what they're looking for. Because the last thing you want is to send something to QC and get back, say, a bunch of content changes. This is not
Yeah.
that's not why you're doing a QC review. That is not the role
Mm-mm.
of your QC reviewer. Now, if the person you're sending it to just knows that content back and forth, again, look at it, evaluate the feedback the same as you would anywhere else, but that's not the particular role that you sent it for. So if you're sending it to one person, because as Tara mentioned before, this is our spelling and grammar person. He or she or they are just great at finding these things and knowing how to avoid dangling participles, knowing all of these different crazy rules, because English is just a ridiculous language. I really, really respect those people, because that is not me. That is not my role. So, have them specifically and send them the review and say, hey, I want you to target your review around the spelling and the grammar. This is the tone I'm going for. This is kind of the overall voice that I want this course to have. Can you look at it from that point of view? Just
Yeah.
that point of view. And I think the key is to really be targeted in who and what you're sending a review to that plays to their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want very specifically like a learner perspective, find somebody that is in that role. Find somebody that maybe they're going to be a future learner or something like that. Maybe they were in that role and now they are on your team. That would be fantastic. Have them put their learner hat on and say, okay, from a learning perspective, you know nothing about this content. Run through this for me. Make sure it makes sense for you and make sure that we're achieving our learning objectives by the end of the course. So
When I review, I'm always looking at it from the learner perspective. Because usually I may not be in the day to day of every single project
right.
at this point. So I am actually looking at it as a new user would look at it. And so when I am reviewing something, somebody else is looking at spelling and grammar. Like I said, I'm looking at it from, if I sat down and I didn't know anything about this, am I learning what the objectives say I'm learning? Am I doing what the objectives say that I'm going to do? So, and I think really for IDs, you should look at every project like that and be like,
Mm-hmm.
if I was going to go do this job, what would I need to know to do it? Because usually that's what you're training somebody is something new that
Right.
they have not done before. So you can give it an honest look of, hey, you know what? I know you're going, from A to B to C, but B is not quite clicking for me. So, it feels like something's missing. And 9 times out of 10, if it's not flowing right, there is something missing. Something's not
Right.
making sense. So, and follow your
Yeah,
instinct. Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. And you said something there that, that should be something that you're doing as an ID anyway,
Mm-hmm.
which is absolutely right. I think unfortunately sometimes we do lose that perspective. Like, okay, we have changed the phrasing around B 47 times. I just
Yes.
I just want it done at this point.
Exactly.
I don't want to look at it again. I don't want to
Look,
heard
the
it.
reality is, Jeremy, sometimes a project just gets there and you're like,
It does.
we just got to be
and
done.
that's why I think it's key.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. I think it's key to bring somebody in that has a fresh perspective, that has not
Mm-hmm.
been there as we change that, verbiage, as we change the wording, as we change the graphics so many times. So, we're on, draft 75 or excuse
Of
me,
the final
draft,
75.
draft 75
Yes.
our project. We need to make sure we're bringing in people that have a fresh set of eyes. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
The other one,
Well, yep.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the next two that we're going to talk to, it's not specialty QC, but it takes a special person to do these types of QCs. is what I was going to say.
Agreed. I'm gonna flip it on us from the list that we have. Let's talk about functionality first.
Absolutely.
I feel like let's save the other one for last because I feel like that's a good conversation. I want to start with functionality. So for functionality is not as important for documents. I would think job aids, reference guides, stuff like that. You want to make sure they're going to be posted somewhere that your learners have access to. And you're going to make sure that they have available software. Make sure they have Adobe if it's a PDF. Make sure
if they have
Microsoft
links,
Word.
The most important thing on that is if they have a link, is it broken or does the link work?
Check your links. Things like that. So that's a functionality review from a document perspective, which is one thing. Now a functionality review for an ILT, for a VILT, or for an e-learning is very, very, very different. So I want to tackle these one at a time, and I'm going to flip it. So let's talk e-learning first. I think that's what most people think about when they think functionality review. Tara's absolutely right. It takes a specific person to go in here, and I pride myself that I'm the guy that can break it. If it's able to be broken, I'm going to break it. And that's kind of the way, the mindset that you have to have going into a functionality review. So if I get an e-learning that says, hey, I want you to make sure this e-learning is functional. Okay, I'm going to do everything I can to break that course. I'm going to click things out of order. I'm going to click things that probably aren't supposed to be clicked. I'm going to try to skip content. I'm going to try to mess up your videos. I'm going to try to do everything I can do because I know and I've seen that learners will do it.
Oh, yeah.
Out. You may think that you've got everything buttoned down, but there's going to be one learner somewhere that's going to find that one corner they're not supposed to click on that's going to break your course. So that's it's my mindset when I'm going to an e-learning review.
Absolutely. And it's functionality testing just like you would do for a software rollout. The whole point of functionality testing is to bug check. You're looking for bugs. You're looking for the things you can break. That's the whole point of it. So, and that is what you're trying to do is break it. And, so that other people can't.
Prototype and beta terminology, because it is, for as far as an e-learning goes, it is software. Like, it is a piece of software that you're developing. So it absolutely needs to be rigorously tested before it's put in. Not only does it need to be tested before you send it off, you also need to do that testing after it goes into your LMS system. You need to make sure that thing is completing right. You need to make sure that, if you make an 80 on the test, it's reporting an 80 to your system. Make sure that the learner, like, if they close out at a certain point, does it save their progress? Does it not save their progress? All of these different type of things also go into an e-learning functionality review. How does it work in the environment that employee is going to have to take it in? And I would usually go a step farther and say, make sure you're testing on the device that employee is going to 100%. Use to test it on. So if your employees are going to take this thing on an iPad, don't test it on a Windows machine and think you're good, because you're not.
Nope.
They work.
And if you expect them to take it on a phone with a screen this size, looking at it on my 38-inch monitor is not 1-to-1. That is not. You go test it where you're going to use it. Yeah, absolutely.
And the 100%. Authoring tools have done a pretty good job of showing the different layouts. There's in Storyline, there's buttons you can click that shows you. I think Rise does all of this pretty smart, where it will kind of using AI maybe.
They call it responsive design.
Responsive design. Yeah, exactly. So now, from an ILT and a VILT perspective, a functionality review there is slightly different. Typically, this is why you're going to want to do like a T3 or something like that. At the very least, you need to do some type of T3, some type of, knowledge transfer when you hand this over to either your client that is then going to take it and try to run in their company, or to whoever your facilitator that's going to be leading your learners in your company. You want to do something to make sure that you've run through that thing start to finish, to make sure all the action flows the way it should, to make sure your timing is as close as you can get it.
Yeah.
With ILTs and VILTs, timing is a big thing because it is not self-paced learning. So you want to make sure that 15-minute break is placed in the right spot. You want to make sure that you're not running from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock and running right over your learner's lunch break. These are important things that you have to remember when it comes to scheduled trainings. So
Yeah, and additionally with that, you have, I mean, the way one of the places that I used to do this stuff for is we would do what we called a dry run, which is a train the trainer.
yep,
But we would actually bring the trainers in and they would teach us the course, teach it to us.
right,
They would get the materials a couple weeks in advance, get prepared, and then they would come to the training center and present the class, work with us. The only things we didn't do is do the exercises step by step, but we would talk through them. Like, because here's the thing, if you're doing functional workforce training, it's probably going to have some hands-on components. And I'm going to say it better have some
it
or you're
should.
doing
Yeah,
it wrong.
exactly.
It
We
should.
both leaned in on that one. It better have
Yes.
some hands-on.
It better have some. And the thing is, lots of things look really good on paper, but you need to go practice and your instructors need to practice because that is going to cause you, it loses credibility with students. It loses credibility with a lot of things. Your learning suffers credibility problems if it's not delivered well. And for VILT, you are adding in a computer to the mix, right?
Ooh.
You have got to make sure that you know how to use that platform, that your instructors know how to use that platform. If you are not lucky enough to have a learning producer who's going to be handling all of the tech stuff in the background, you need to know how to troubleshoot
Please
that
have
program.
a producer, guys. Please have a
Please have a producer. Don't torture your facilitators into having to do the IT work behind it. It's like, I mean, there are so many moving parts that, not testing it first and implementing it and piloting it and trying it out is just so dangerous. So, I mean, because that's the only way to find out for those types of trainings is to actually go do it and practice it wherever you're going to do it.
And I don't think anybody that has ever had to do a VILT, instructional designer or facilitator, hasn't had a bad experience with a breakout room. I think it's almost a rite of passage that if you're doing any kind of virtual instruction, you're going to hit that breakout room button and it's going to die. Something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Something's
going to happen.
It's just going to blow up. Yeah, absolutely. So,
absolutely.
So that's kind of our functionality review. Now, the last thing we're going to discuss is pretty big, and I think it's become more and more. Mm-hmm. I was about to say larger, but that's not the word. It's become a bigger concern in recent times, and I think it's great. So that's an accessibility review. Mm-hmm. So I think, as far as from a learning perspective, I think we've come a long way, probably in the past 5 to 10 years, as far as accessibility goes. When e-learnings first started, there were no closed captions. There were screen readers were not even on the horizon and being thought about. So, and those are the two big things for me. But now, we're talking. There's additional conversations going on about, having a colorblind mode to help people there and making sure that, the contrast between foreground, background, and text is looked at. So I wanted to have a larger conversation around this because I think different companies do different levels of accessibility testing, but it is something that you need to check separately from everything else. It is a separate check, and you need to have somebody that really knows what they're looking for, especially if we're going towards, the screen reader or, the colorblind mode. And I guess I should say everybody knows, hopefully, what closed captions are, and that type of thing. But a screen reader is a program that allows somebody that does not have great vision to be able to operate a computer. So, most people know they can tab around to different things on the computer. What a screen reader does is, as you're tabbing around to different things, it is reading off the metadata in whatever that window has, whatever that image has on it, and it's reading that aloud. Now, metadata is something that you're not going to see, but it is something that is written into that file, that folder, that image. And there are, depending on, we can't go into how to change that because it's different depending on, if it's an image or if it's a file folder, a menu, what software you're using. But that's how a screen reader works. It picks up on metadata and it'll read out what the person is currently selecting on their computer. So if it's an image, there are two ways that screen reader could work. One, it goes to the image and it's going to read the actual name of the file. And if the name of that file is a whole long, just crazy gibberish with a bunch of numbers on it, that's what it's going to read. So I think from an accessibility standpoint, the first thing you could do is just label your assets. Crazy talk, I know, but
well, and it's alt text, right? It's like making sure your alt text matches your labels so that it knows what to read. And you don't, I mean, the thing about, I've been working on accessibility for us internally, and it is so big. It is such a big thing. And it's going to require some probably education with your customers, internal, external, whoever they are, because it has come to the forefront like it should. It also is being used as like a buzzword type thing, which really irritates me, because people will say, oh, well, just make it accessible. And you're like, okay, well, hang on, because there's flavors of accessible. There are levels,
exactly.
There's AAA, AA, single A, there's, the WCAG, there's the the federal rules. The federal government has a specific set of rules about that. I mean, there are a lot of things that go with it. So it requires a conversation with people about what that looks like. And then you have to have people who really know how this stuff works, because one of the things about it is, because of the way you have to develop certain accessible things, it limits some pieces of creativity because screen readers can't read it. And I mean, one of the most basic rules for accessibility is it should be accessible to everyone, regardless of whether they can see it, hear it, whatever. Everybody needs to get the same information. So you've got to play with that. It can be limiting from a development standpoint, but it doesn't have to be terrible. I mean, it doesn't have to be boring or unattractive or, whatever. You can still make it those things, but accessibility will ratchet that down a little bit just so the technology can catch up. And I think it will.
Right.
Without a doubt.
And what I always remember is, when we started doing more like screen reader accessibility in a previous employer, one of the main things, we were working with our accessibility team at the time, and they were fantastic. And one of the main things was, don't put anything on mouse over.
Exactly.
Because a screen reader won't catch it. Like a screen reader does not read anything that is on any kind of mouse over. So that essentially completely eliminates one whole interactive element that you can't use. And maybe at the end of the day, if you want to be that fully accessible, it may be that you have two courses.
Yeah. And that's a whole thing. Absolutely. But most people don't want to spend the money to do two courses. So, that's you
have to find out what works within your project, what works within your budget and within your company. If you want to be on the leading edge of accessibility and making sure that everybody can take your training and have a good experience, because that's the key of what we're talking about.
That's right.
People with any kind of accessibility need, they're used to having to get around these things.
Yeah.
If you want to give them as good of a learning experience as you're giving somebody else, it may be that there is a different course. Maybe there's a different course that uses different colors for, high contrast or colorblind folks, or maybe there's a specific course that's just for use with screen readers and things like that.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. Most people don't want to think about that because it does require a different mind around design when it comes to being 100% accessible. And it is very difficult, which is why it needs a very specific QC and review.
Exactly.
So it needs those people. And one of the things, so when we were developing for screen readers, it was, very, very new to me I got the screen reader installed and I was using it as I was kind of watching it go through and making changes as it went. And I was not getting there. We didn't have dedicated QC at the time, and I just couldn't get around it. And eventually I was like, okay, I'm just going to have to, like, I might have to do this. Like,
Mhm.
I took the entire course with my eyes closed using the screen reader. Obviously I was using it a lot slower and a lot worse than, my accessible learners would be using it. And that's when it finally started to click on what I needed to put in this metadata and the order in which it had to be, because
Reading
that's
order
the other
is
big thing with a
huge.
screen
Yep.
reader is reading order. Like you need to make
Hmm.
sure you've eliminated things they don't need.
Yep.
Because, if let's say you're using a, standard, I call it B-roll, but like clip
Hmm.
art thing in the back of all your slides, that's going to appear on your screen reader each time.
every every time.
So
Well,
go
and
in and
the other,
remove them. They don't need
yeah,
that. If it doesn't provide context for the content, they don't need it to
absolutely.
be there, because it does
No.
not help them that every time they go to this first slide, they're going to hear, this is a picture of a man and a woman in an office,
Yes.
or
Well, and there's
whatever the name
also
of
the
that file is.
whole, I mean, I'm going to add a layer to accessibility for you, but how about language and diversity and making sure that it's
That's a good point.
accessible
Yeah, that's
to other people? It's not, those things need to be considered too when you think about accessibility. It's not just about, people who need assistance with hearing or with the vision issues. It's also just the, use of pronouns. What kind of pictures are you using? What kind of graphics are you using? What kind of language
fantastic.
are you using?
Yes.
That is another
No,
layer
that's
to it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and I think that's absolutely something else that should be reviewed. I almost feel like maybe that should be its own bullet on our list.
It probably could
But
be.
you're
And you know
absolutely
what,
right.
though? When you think about what's a heavier lift of having to develop a certain way to do things, changing the language and the images and, just the tone is a lot easier lift than some of this other stuff
Right.
is. So if you can only take a few steps toward accessibility, start with those and then move on to the more difficult or the more challenging pieces while you get some of those processes in place and make it standard so that
Yeah.
everybody's getting an
Absolutely.
equal experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would agree with that 100%. And I think what, for me, as I was growing up, these were things that I didn't notice. I think it's become more and more. It's always been important.
Hmm.
I think it's really where I've started to notice these things, that representation really matters. Like
Yes.
I have been extremely lucky and privileged that, I have had things represent me for my life. And that's not, so I've never, until very, I say very recently, but, a couple of years ago, when all of this really started to come to a head with what was going on in the country, it was one of those things where it's just not something that I noticed. And now I look back on it and I say, how could I not
Not
have seen
notice.
this? Like I get
Yeah.
I get angry at myself. So
Oh,
I'm
I
like,
know.
the signs were there
Hmm.
and it just did not affect me, so I didn't notice. And it unfortunately it did. It took everything coming to a head as it did. With all the stuff that happened with COVID, all the stuff that happened with, the Black Lives Matter movement
Hmm.
and the Me Too movement and all this different stuff, you know, it was a definite blind spot for me. And it's something that I try very hard to make sure that I address that blind spot at this point,
Hmm.
because representation really, really, really does matter. So if you're, in the same way that if you were developing training for a field technician, all of your, stock art images are not going to be people in a corporate office, because you're not
Yeah.
representing your learner. It's the exact same thing. So
Hmm.
make sure that all of your models and all of your stock images, make sure they're not middle-aged white guys. It's really not that hard. So you just have to be able to see it and
Yes.
recognize that that's what's happening, because representation is very, very important.
Hmm.
I feel like we could probably
we could
do.
have
I think
done an
we should
entire
do.
podcast on that, but
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
want to talk about it from an accessibility standpoint, that is accessibility. And when it comes to QCing that, I want somebody looking at it through that lens whenever they're looking at it. I want somebody looking
Yeah,
looking through the
absolutely.
editorial lens, through the learner perspective lens, through an accessibility lens, from a functionality lens. Those are all different ways to quality control learning, and it should be being done at some level somewhere. Do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's about our time, guys. That's we honestly did not think we would be able to put an hour on QC. Clearly we are passionate about it because we were able to put this much time onto QC with, albeit with a couple of side roads there. So
Jeremy,
we
these are the people that keep us from looking stupid. It is
that is
important.
exactly right. And I will say again, I am very thankful that they are there. That we are very lucky to have a QC team. They are fantastic, and they save me more often than not. So
Oh yeah,
I will
100%.
give all credit that they deserve. They are fantastic. So with that, thank you all of you QC folks, and we will
Yes.
see you next time. We appreciate it.
Bye.